it's a pretty important part to do today because I don't know my mother very well. Anyway, so this is an account that tells you more about her background and what sort of a person I felt from all the stories I've heard, as well as what I knew from having known her. So I'm going to ad-lib on this, but and if any of you have any questions as I go along, we can't take too much time for questions, but please just ask me and start me when I'm talking here. The first thing is that the Smiths my mother's Smiths came from what was a very successful two generations, particularly the first of those gentlemen, both their names were George Smith, surprisingly, and then there was one more, and then my grandfather came along, and at that time, which we're now up to about 1900, they made the family, by the way, made their money in shipbuilding on the River Clyde and lived in Glasgow, and then around 1900 they made enough money, I guess, and I think all I've heard they were very well off, and they must have been to do what they did. My grandfather, who was also George Smith, decided to buy Pittodrie, move away from Dunoon where they lived in Glasgow, and so and this wonderful estate in Aberdeenshire was up for sale in 1902 when my mother was 2 years old, and so they decided to buy Pittodrie and an estate. And I know some of you know the place, but Pittodrie is the most wonderful place. And the others were talking, Peter and Megan were talking about in the car this morning. It is must be one of the leading estates, perhaps not the most beautiful house in Scotland, but it's the most beautiful property with tall trees around beautiful fields on the foot of Benahee. So this is where my mother was born and brought up. One of the interesting notes here, which I think I've got time for, is that Molly's dad George and his brother Robert, my uncle Bob, and some of you that have been around for a while probably heard us talk about Uncle Bob, because he lived quite a long life. Certainly, I knew him. That's my grandfather's brother. I should say very first, because most importantly, my grandfather was actually killed in the First World War, quite close to the time my uncles on the other side of the family, my Uncle George was killed in northern France, and they were actually, Virginia and I visited the site in France where their names stand on memorials in France, and that's a beautiful place to visit sometime if you are there. Virginia and I found their names on the memorial stones at the Battle of Neuchâtel, where my mother's father died, and also where Uncle George died at the Battle of Loch. It was only about 10 minutes drive from there. So and that was quite a day for us too. So anyway, to come back to these brothers marrying sisters, what is so interesting is that my grandfather George and his brother Robert, Uncle Bob, they married sisters. George married Kathleen Workman, and Robert married Jessica Workman. So Kathleen Workman became Granny to us. We called her Granny, and she lived a long life until after I had left for America. Actually, just not long after I left, she died in 1964. So she lived a very long life, and the family knew her quite well. I wouldn't otherwise say anything about her really. And Aunt Jessie, we called her. She lived in Cromally, which is adjacent to Pittodrie. So you can imagine these two huge estates side by side. I don't think they got together a lot, but they were certainly run quite independently of one another. Cromally did Cromally, and Pittodrie did Pittodrie. They didn't ever try to, because it was so much land and good land to farm and so on. By the time I was born, the Pittodrie estate must have gone through a few modifications and alterations. As a small child, however, I well remember many of the staff and components it took to run the show. I will not forget Nora the cook in the large kitchen that seemed to operate for most of the day, Sophie the deaf housemaid, and Wallace, my grandmother's chauffeur, who took us around in the Rolls Royce that was compartmentalized. It had a just like a modern taxi cab. It had a seat between the back, and there were little seats that faced to the back row of seats. And I just loved to go in the Rolls Royce, except we got terribly sick when it took you around those Aberdeenshire roads, curves and things. We'd always have to say, Wallace, stop the car. We got something to do. And the house was just extraordinary. I remember as a child, the house had a beautiful nursery upstairs in the back of the house, where at my age then, I just remember always when we went to Pataudry, the first place I'd go to was the nursery and play with the toys and everything else up there. It was always very exciting. Sometimes I wasn't allowed to go downstairs even because I wasn't behaving well enough to do that, but I was always allowed to go to the nursery. That was quite satisfying. So we had some wonderful holidays. We used to go there for anywhere between a week and a month in the summer, every summer for a while, and that was interrupted by other things going on in our lives from time to time. So that sort of covers all of that first part. Now the next part. From the correspondence record, I've developed an understanding of Molly that goes something as follows. By the way, I never really explained that she was Mary Kathleen Smith, but all her friends and her family that could refer to her as other than mother, she was Molly, and that was the name by which she must have been relatively quiet and shy. She loved animals so much so that her parents, and this is a lesson for Angus and Charlie, her parents actually gave her the farm, just gave her, it wasn't inherited, gave her the farm of Dundowno, which I think they probably purchased actually from what I understand, gave her the farm of Dundowno that is located on the public road just on the edge of the Pataudry estate on the way to the village of Gary, which is the local village where the church was associated with Pataudry, and you had to go out that front gate when we walked to church. When we were at Pataudry and we had to go to church every Sunday, we went through that gate and past Drumderno, and if you ever go to Pataudry, it's still there today on the edges of the Pataudry estate. Actually, I think it's probably been subsumed into the Pataudry estate now, but I'm not too sure. I've never quite understood how the arrangement worked when she was given the farm. How it actually worked out in terms of management. I think probably my guess is that the Pataudry estate took care of the day-to-day management and everything else, but what my mother would have probably done, from what I understand, is that she would have been very much, not perhaps in charge, but certainly indicating what she wished to happen with the animals. She was the animal person. She wouldn't have cared about the crops, and that part, the crops would have been done by Pataudry estate, and she would have been leading them. But she was only, I understand she was only about 18 or 19 at this time, so this was very young in life. And I think she must have spent hours on the farm. She loved her beautiful Clydesdales. She had some Clydesdales, and she loved the beautiful Clydesdales as well as the other large animals. And she probably was quite involved in keeping records for the farm. One thing of clarity, she never rode. She didn't ride horses. She didn't like to ride at all, really, very much. So she never rode. They never kept thoroughbreds or anything like that. The Clydesdales that she loved and appreciated. So it was not surprising then that after she left school, well, I don't even know if she even went to school. I hadn't ever found out whether she went to school. She may have had a governess, so she had probably a very sort of supervised education. But she may have gone to school. I never heard about it. But anyway, she applied for the diploma program at Aberdeen University. So in about, well, I'm not sure of the exact year, but it must have been probably maybe 1919 actually. She went to Aberdeen University and got a diploma in agriculture. And there's quite a few books circulating. Oh, not a lot, but and I've seen them. I think I've even got one of them. Books of the diaries that she kept of her notes that she took in class at Aberdeen University, and indeed they're the most meticulous, detailed notes of classes and records there. They put my records totally to shame. When I saw these, I said, well, where did her genes go in me? They're absolutely lovely. So that was that, and then the next stage in her life after she left Aberdeen was she met my father. He had just come back from doing reading. He never did a degree, as far as I can tell. This is one thing that I've told several of you already that I'm fascinated in right now, because I don't know what happened to father really in this period, except that he did go to Iowa for a year. But apart from that, I don't know of any university he went to. He was by that time, he was born in '98, so by the early 20s he was certainly 22, 23. He did his year in Iowa, but he never, to my knowledge, enrolled in Aberdeen or enrolled in any university, except he must have gone to Aberdeen. Well, actually, his parents were because his father was the chancellor chancellor of the University of Aberdeen, principal of Aberdeen, so they must have gone up there to see them a lot. And in any event, he met Molly, and that must have been about 24, I assume, because they were married in 26 on the 25th of March and then 26th in the chapel of Gary, and from then on their life is really pretty straightforward. My father, and this is the other thing that amazes me, despite what I'm concerned about his education, he got a job. I'm not sure what job it was, but it was some kind of, I think it must have been a lecturer, Hannah, at the Institute of Animal Genetics at the University of Edinburgh. So they decided to move to Edinburgh, and well, they didn't decide. I mean, that was really the only choice they had, because that was where he got his job, and then they this was and where they lived in Edinburgh. If any of you are in Edinburgh sometime, because the family father and mother lived in Edinburgh for a number of years. I'm not sure how long, maybe only about 5 or 6 actually, but it was on Mayfield Gardens, and I used to go to our doctor when I was growing up was in Mayfield Gardens, so I used to go to Mayfield Gardens quite a bit at that time, but it's not far from West Mains Road where he worked, because the Institute of Animal Genetics is on West Mains Road. But that's not saying much about my mother, so I better get on. So anyway, that was where Mary was born. I'm pretty sure Mary and George must have been born in Mayfield Gardens. I'm never really quite sure, but as you may know, they bought Limfoy, which is between Curry and Belano. So they moved out of town and then subsequently bought House of Coburn, which was much closer to the time I was born. That's pretty much that. George, Alec and Robin were all born at Limfoy, but before I was born, my parents had then bought House of Coburn. I'll say this just to make everybody proud. Bought House of Coburn, a wonderful place to grow up in, with a Lorimer alteration and policies not unlike, but quite reduced compared to Pataudry. And then came Coburn Farm, because they bought Coburn Farm, and so and this is another very interesting part that I really don't know nearly enough about. But my mother must have pretty well run Coburn Farm, especially during the war. And I never really asked any questions about it. I wasn't thinking straight enough to be prescient to ask my father more about that period. He was reticent ever to talk very much about the war, and so I just left that subject untouched, and I never had a chance to really talk to my mother about it. But she must have run Coburn Farm pretty much on her own for 5 years, which is pretty extraordinary, really. And because father was away, he wasn't in France for more than a short time because he got shingles and was seconded back home in 1940 actually. So he didn't spend much time in France, but he was down in London for, I understand, for most of the rest of the war in a senior position in in the administration of the armed forces and so on. So not never at the front again, but he did also command some battalions of the army up in Orkney, for example. He did a lot during the war, and meantime, Mother was at home. There are lots of letters of that period, Angus, that you were indicating might still be somewhere around the family. Or, Angus.
Yeah, no, there definitely are.
Yeah. So that's something that's worth considering further interested. But I was just going to say that when they bought Coburn Farm, they developed a herd of 60 Ayrshire milking cows at Coburn, and slightly more than that at Shothead. I didn't mention Shothead. Shothead was a farm they bought from University of Edinburgh. They were developing research farms on the other side of the Pentland Hills, and they decided they didn't need Shothead anymore. So Shothead was sold to Mummy and Daddy, Mother and Father, and so that was a herd of slightly larger herd than a Coburn. That was more like a herd of 80 or perhaps 90 cows. I think. I forget the exact number, but that was the operation. And about what would it be for two farms? Angus, it would be about 600 acres or something.
Yeah, just like that, slightly less than that.
Yeah, so that was that. There's a little bit in the notes here about, which we're not going to go into, about the Lithgow-Stirlingshire hunt, which they participated in a bit. My mother didn't, though, because she didn't ride. But my father did, and I think George and Mary both rode there in the Lithgow-Stirlingshire hunt for a while. But they were up to, just to mention this, they were up to and possibly more than 20 full-time employees on the farm at that time. It was so employee intense that there was an amazing number of people, and there was always the bothy Angus, or where they could keep single people and so on. So there were a lot of employees. Good. Now I want to come to a critical last part. My mother is a mother. This is the crux of it, isn't it? I knew her, but it might be better to say I lived with her for only just over 6-7 years. She was loving. When my siblings, especially George, Alec and Robin, were about to catch me, I found she was always ready to provide protection. I was completely safe in her arms from my big bad brothers. She could be sensitive. I still remember one day as a small child standing in the bay window of the dining room at House of Coburn as we waved goodbye to one of my brothers as they were leaving home for an extended period of time. There were tears on her cheeks. We were so fortunate that our mother and father adored each other. My father's adoration for her was seen throughout my childhood, and later by how House of Coburn remained as it was for decades after she died. And some of you may not know that, but certainly was true. That's not written in here. That's an extemporaneous comment. Even after her death, there was the usual frame from Daddy: "Your mother would have liked it this way." So that put me down in my place. One point that many others may not be aware of, is that Mummy was very musical. Hence stems the grand piano that was on the right as one entered the drawing room at House of Coburn. I well remember hymns that were sung on Sunday evenings. First off, on this topic, as a family, my parents were strict in observing morning prayers every day of the week. This usually consisted of remaining at the dining table after breakfast and reading a text from the Bible, followed by standing up, turning around, and then kneeling at a chair for a prayer, spoken by Daddy. On Sunday evenings, this is the great part. On Sunday evenings, we would have hymns, for which the music was provided by Mummy on the piano. The 5 children, and I really even remember that, even though I was only 7, to hear Mummy playing the piano. The 5 children and Daddy had to line up. I remember we had to line up against the wall on the left as you go into the drawing room, and we really were lined up. I mean, my father made a whole circus out of it. He would look down the line and say, "Jock, get back that way. Robin, you get back that way. You're not." And I think we even had a standard attention pretty much during the whole exercise. So it was very highly held. This hymn sing on Sunday evening was very highly. It was totally out of tune, but that didn't seem to matter. Of course, I got onto the point where there wasn't anybody to play the piano after Mother died. But that was something that was absolutely routine on Sunday evenings. And that was, and this all might explain why there was only one hymn ever sung. It was we were too out of tune to sing any more than one hymn. Sometimes we actually had to stand up and sing "God Save the King" or the Queen, and that was part of it. And then this is a little point that I have to conclude with, and that is that one final observation that reflects on my parents and the love they had for one another, which I haven't really talked about very much, is to make a comment about something that happened while I was still a small boy and obviously before Mother died. I myself, my parents, and one or two other members of the family were headed to, I don't quite know how this all worked out, but we were headed to see a game of international rugby at Murrayfield. One had to park the car at a fair distance from the stadium. It was a wintry day with snow on the ground. A young whippersnapper of a kid fired a snowball towards us and it bounced off Mummy's face. Oh my God, did the whippersnapper get it from Dad? There was a lesson there for me that I've never forgotten. So that's it.
Jock, how are we doing on time?
4:10, yeah, so we
It's fine.
better
It's
be
fine.
wrapping up.
It's fine. It's fine.